My beloved child, there is something about your soulmate that you were never supposed to understand from the surface. What you have seen so far is only the visible part of a story that has been quietly developing beneath everything you thought you knew. And the most unexpected part is this: the truth may not arrive through a dramatic confession, a perfect moment, or some obvious sign. It may arrive through words that your soulmate has struggled to say for a very long time. Imagine receiving a letter from the person whose presence has somehow remained in the deepest corner of your thoughts, a letter written not because they suddenly became fearless, but because keeping everything inside became harder than telling you the truth. There is a reason this message feels different from ordinary words. Your soulmate may have been carrying questions about you, memories of you, and feelings they never knew how to explain. They may have wondered whether you still think about them, whether you would understand their silence, and whether the distance between you changed what was once possible. But there is one sentence hidden behind all of that uncertainty, and when you finally hear it, you may suddenly understand why certain moments never completely left your mind. Stay with this story, because the letter is not really about what happened before. It is about what your soulmate has finally realized now. And that realization changes the meaning of everything that came before it. There is a moment approaching in this story where the words become impossible to misunderstand, where the person who once kept their heart guarded begins revealing what they were too uncertain to express. But before that happens, you need to understand one thing: sometimes a soulmate story does not begin with two people finding each other. Sometimes it begins with two people realizing that they never truly stopped wondering about each other. There is a deeper layer to this letter, and this is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. Your soulmate may not have written these words during a moment of confidence. They may have written them after remembering something incredibly small about you, something you probably never realized mattered. Maybe it was the way you looked at them when they were speaking. Maybe it was a simple conversation that ended too quickly. Maybe it was a moment when neither of you said what you actually felt, yet somehow both of you understood that something important had just happened. Those tiny moments can become surprisingly powerful when someone looks back on them later. Your soulmate may have replayed one particular memory more times than you would ever imagine, asking themselves why it stayed with them when so many other memories disappeared. And now the letter begins to make sense, because the first shocking truth may be this: they did not forget you as easily as they wanted you to believe. They may have tried to continue their life normally, to focus on other things, to convince themselves that the connection was simply a chapter that had already ended. But whenever life became quiet, your memory had a way of returning. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to make them wonder, what if I had said what I really felt? That question can follow someone for a long time. And perhaps this is exactly why the letter exists. It is not simply a message from someone who misses you. It is the beginning of an explanation. Your soulmate may finally be ready to tell you what was happening inside them when you thought nothing was happening at all. They may tell you about the hesitation, the confusion, the moments they almost reached out, and the words they typed but never sent. And when that truth begins unfolding, you may realize that silence was never as simple as it looked. But wait, because the most powerful part has not arrived yet. There is something your soulmate may want you to know that completely changes the emotional weight of this letter. They may have discovered that the biggest obstacle between you was not a lack of feeling, it was uncertainty. Uncertainty about timing. Uncertainty about whether you wanted the same thing. Uncertainty about whether opening their heart would bring closeness or create another distance. And perhaps your soulmate has been living with one question that they could never fully silence: did I lose my chance? That question can make a person look backward even while moving forward. It can make an ordinary song feel meaningful, an old place feel strangely familiar, or a random memory suddenly carry the weight of an entire chapter. And then comes the part you were never expecting. The letter may contain an admission that your soulmate has been waiting for the right moment to say. Not because they wanted to play games with your emotions, but because they needed to understand their own heart before asking you to understand it. They may tell you that there were things they wanted to say when you were together, things they wanted to explain when you were apart, and things they wanted to confess after realizing that pretending not to care was becoming exhausting. One particular truth may stand above everything else: they are beginning to understand that losing communication does not automatically mean losing significance. You can stop talking to someone and still carry the meaning of what happened. You can move forward and still wonder whether a different choice could have changed the story. And that is why this letter feels so important. It is not promising that everything will suddenly become perfect. It is revealing that someone may finally be willing to stop hiding behind uncertainty and speak honestly about what your connection meant to them. And now, listen closely, because the final revelation in this first chapter is the one that may make you look at the entire soulmate story differently. The letter may not begin with, "I miss you." It may begin with something far more unexpected: "There is something I never told you." Those words carry an entirely different weight, because they suggest that the truth has been sitting there all along, waiting for enough courage to be spoken. What if the part of the story you considered finished was actually the part your soulmate never understood how to close? What if their silence was not an answer, but an unfinished sentence? What if the reason you kept remembering certain moments was simply because those moments mattered more than either of you admitted at the time? Your soulmate may finally explain that there was a version of the truth they wanted to tell you long ago, but they were afraid that saying it would change everything. And now, after all the reflection, all the unanswered questions, and all the distance, they may have reached a point where honesty feels more important than protecting themselves from uncertainty. That is where the letter becomes personal. It may contain a memory only the two of you could understand. It may mention a moment you thought they had forgotten. It may reveal that something you said casually remained in their mind for years. And just when you think you understand what they are trying to tell you, another sentence appears, one that forces you to reconsider whether this story was ever truly over. Because the greatest shock may not be that your soulmate still remembers you. The greatest shock may be discovering exactly what they remember. There is one truth they have been holding behind every hesitation, every unanswered question, and every moment of silence, and when that truth finally comes into the open, the letter will no longer feel like a message from the past. It will feel like the beginning of an entirely different conversation, one where neither of you has to pretend anymore. Something has changed in the way your soulmate remembers you, and this is where the letter begins revealing what was hidden beneath their silence. They are not simply thinking about a person from their past. They are thinking about a connection they never fully understood while they were living through it. There is a particular memory they keep returning to, and strangely enough, it may not be the biggest or most romantic moment you shared. It could be something ordinary, a conversation, a glance, a quiet goodbye, or even a moment when you were both present but neither of you knew what to say. That small memory became important later because your soulmate began recognizing something they could not recognize at the time. You made them feel understood without demanding an explanation. You noticed something about them that others overlooked. And perhaps that is why the letter took so long to write. The more they tried to understand what they felt, the more they realized that their emotions were connected to something much deeper than simple attraction. They may have started comparing other connections to what they experienced with you, and that comparison revealed something uncomfortable but honest: something was missing. Not because every other person was wrong, but because the particular emotional familiarity they associated with you was difficult to replace. Your soulmate may have asked themselves why they still remembered the details, why certain words from you remained so clear, and why the thought of finally explaining everything felt so important. And now, the letter is becoming less about reaching back and more about finally telling the truth. They want you to know that there were moments when they wanted to come closer but did not know whether the door was still open. They wondered if you had moved on emotionally, if you would even want to hear from them, or if their message would arrive too late. That uncertainty became the wall between what they felt and what they expressed. But something inside them has shifted. They are beginning to understand that waiting for perfect certainty can mean waiting forever. And this time, they may be choosing honesty instead. Here is the part that makes this letter even more unexpected. Your soulmate may admit that they misunderstood you. They may have interpreted your silence as indifference, your distance as rejection, or your calmness as proof that you no longer cared. Meanwhile, you may have been experiencing something completely different. Two people can feel deeply and still misunderstand each other when neither one is willing to reveal what is happening beneath the surface. That may have been the real turning point in your story. Your soulmate may have assumed that if you wanted them, you would make the first move. You may have assumed that if they truly cared, they would speak first. And suddenly, both people were waiting. Both were watching. Both were wondering. Yet neither wanted to be the one who looked vulnerable. The letter may finally acknowledge that mistake. Your soulmate may say that they spent too much time trying to interpret your actions instead of simply asking you what was in your heart. They may confess that they built conclusions from incomplete information and then allowed those conclusions to shape their behavior. And when they finally looked honestly at the situation, they realized how much could have been different if one conversation had happened at the right moment. This is why the next part matters so much. Your soulmate is not only remembering what they felt, they are taking responsibility for what they failed to communicate. That is a major difference. Anyone can say they miss someone. But admitting, "should have told you the truth when I had the chance," requires a completely different kind of honesty. The letter may reveal that they now understand the cost of staying silent, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. They may have learned that meaningful connections cannot survive forever on assumptions. At some point, someone has to put down the fear of being misunderstood and simply speak. Then comes the sentence that your soulmate may have rewritten more times than you could ever know. They may have started with something simple, deleted it, tried again, and stopped because every version felt too small for what they actually wanted to say. They may have wondered whether "I miss you" was enough. Then they realized it wasn't. Because what they truly wanted to express was not merely that they remember you. It was that they finally understand why they could never completely dismiss what happened between you. Perhaps you were not the easiest person to forget because the connection challenged something inside them. You made them question what they genuinely wanted from love, what kind of emotional safety mattered to them, and what it meant to be seen without having to perform. Maybe your soulmate has realized that they were looking for certainty from everyone except themselves. They wanted someone to guarantee that the future would work before they allowed themselves to become emotionally honest. But relationships do not come with that guarantee. And perhaps that realization is exactly what gave them the courage to write. They may not know how you will respond. They may not know whether the timing is perfect. They may not know what happens after the final sentence. But they know that keeping the truth hidden has kept the story suspended in a place where neither person can understand what it really meant. So now, the letter becomes a bridge between what was left unsaid and what can finally be understood. And there is one detail they may reveal that could completely surprise you. They remember a moment when you thought they were not paying attention. You believed your words disappeared into an ordinary conversation, but your soulmate carried them away. Maybe you said something about the kind of love you wanted. Maybe you revealed a fear you rarely shared. Maybe you told them what loyalty, honesty, or genuine connection meant to you. They remembered it. They may have never told you that they remembered it, but they did. And that is the detail that makes the letter feel real, not because it promises a perfect ending, but because it proves that your presence left an impression deeper than you realized. Now the letter reaches the point where your soulmate has to stop circling around the truth and finally face it. They may have spent so much time asking whether you still think about them that they forgot to ask the more important question: what would I say if I finally had the chance? And now that chance exists within the story. The words may come slowly at first, almost cautiously, because they know that one honest sentence can open everything they once kept closed. They may tell you that they regret allowing uncertainty to speak louder than their feelings. They may tell you that they wish they had been more direct, more courageous, and more willing to trust the connection instead of constantly analyzing it. But then the tone changes. The careful words become simpler. More personal. More vulnerable. Your soulmate may finally say that they never needed you to be perfect. They never needed some extraordinary version of you. They wanted the person who made them feel like they could breathe, laugh, speak honestly, and be themselves without constantly wondering whether they were enough. And then comes the revelation that changes the emotional direction of the entire letter. They may not be writing to recreate the past. They may be writing because they want to know whether something genuine can still be built from the truth. That distinction matters. The past cannot be rewritten, but the meaning of the past can be understood differently. Your soulmate may finally recognize that what they lost was not simply a relationship or a possibility, it was an opportunity to communicate openly when it mattered most. And now they do not want another opportunity to disappear behind silence. They want clarity. They want honesty. They want to know what remains when assumptions are removed and both hearts are allowed to speak without pretending. But there is still one sentence left in the letter, and it is the sentence your soulmate has been most afraid to write. It is not a promise. It is not a demand. It is a question. And once that question is revealed, you may finally understand why this entire letter had to be written in the first place. My beloved child, the letter has reached the moment where the words become more personal, because your soulmate is no longer trying to explain what happened around the connection. They are finally trying to explain what happened inside their own heart. There is a truth they may have avoided because admitting it would mean admitting that you affected them more deeply than they ever allowed you to see. They may have told themselves that time would make everything clearer, that enough distance would make the memories feel ordinary again, but something unexpected happened instead. The longer they waited, the more certain one realization became. They never received the closure they thought they had. Not because the past must be repeated, but because something important was never spoken. Your soulmate may remember the exact moment when they first realized that you were different. Perhaps it was not dramatic at all. Maybe you simply listened when everyone else wanted to speak. Maybe you remembered something they had casually mentioned. Maybe you made them laugh at a time when they had forgotten how easily they could laugh. Those details became meaningful later. And now they are realizing that the strongest connections are not always recognized while they are happening. Sometimes their significance becomes clear only after the noise disappears. That is why this letter may contain a confession that surprises you. Your soulmate may admit that they tried to convince themselves that you were easy to move past. They tried to reduce the connection to timing, circumstance, or coincidence because those explanations felt safer than admitting they were emotionally affected. But every time they thought the story had become irrelevant, another memory quietly returned. And eventually they had to ask themselves why. Why you? Why that connection? Why those particular moments? Why did the unanswered questions remain when so many other things had already faded? The answer may be uncomfortable because it requires honesty. They did not simply remember you. They remembered who they were when they were with you. And sometimes that is what makes a soulmate connection feel impossible to dismiss, not because someone is magically destined to return, but because the connection reveals a version of yourself that you genuinely miss. Then the letter takes an unexpected turn. Your soulmate may tell you that they were afraid you had already changed your heart. They may have imagined you meeting someone else, building a different life, or simply becoming emotionally unavailable to the story you once shared. And instead of asking you directly, they allowed their imagination to answer the question for them. This is where so much confusion can begin. When people care deeply but communicate poorly, silence becomes a canvas where the mind paints its own explanations. Your soulmate may have wondered whether you had forgotten their voice, their expressions, their habits, or the small details that once made the connection feel natural. They may have wondered if you would recognize the person they are now, because they know they are not exactly the same person who once stood beside you. Time has changed them. Reflection has changed them. Perhaps they have become more honest about what they want and more aware of what they previously avoided. They may now understand that love cannot be built entirely from chemistry or emotion. It requires communication, patience, emotional maturity, and the willingness to say what you actually mean. That realization could be one of the most important things your soulmate wants to tell you. They may admit that they once expected feelings to automatically tell them what to do, but feelings do not provide instructions. They only reveal what matters. The choices still belong to the people involved. And that is why this letter is not simply a dramatic confession. It is an attempt to take responsibility for the choices that were made, the conversations that never happened, and the assumptions that filled the silence. Your soulmate may tell you that they wish they had asked you what you needed instead of guessing. They wish they had explained their own uncertainty instead of withdrawing into it. And most importantly, they wish they had understood that being vulnerable does not make someone weak. Sometimes vulnerability is the only path toward truth. But there is something else hidden between the lines, and this may be the detail that hits your heart the hardest. Your soulmate may remember a moment when you needed reassurance, understanding, or simply a little more honesty from them, and they did not give it. At the time, perhaps they did not realize what that moment meant. They may have been distracted by their own confusion, their own expectations, or their fear of saying the wrong thing. But later, they replayed it. They wondered whether a different response could have changed the way you experienced the entire connection. That memory may have become one of the reasons they hesitated to contact you. They did not want to return simply to say beautiful words while ignoring the parts where they fell short. They wanted to understand what they had learned. And that is why their letter may sound different from the message you once expected. It may contain an apology that is not designed to manipulate your emotions or demand forgiveness. It may simply be an acknowledgement, "I understand now." Your soulmate may finally understand why you became quieter. Why you stopped explaining yourself. Why you stopped chasing clarity from someone who was not ready to provide it. They may understand that you deserve directness instead of mixed signals, honesty instead of assumptions, and respect instead of emotional uncertainty. That realization can transform the entire story because it means your soulmate is no longer looking at the past only from their own perspective. They are beginning to see it through your eyes. And once someone genuinely sees the impact of their choices, they cannot unlearn that awareness. The letter may therefore become less about convincing you and more about giving you the truth you should have received earlier. Your soulmate may say that they cannot change what happened, but they can finally stop pretending it meant nothing. They can finally admit that you mattered, that the connection mattered, and that the unanswered questions mattered enough to deserve an honest explanation. And just when you think you understand where the letter is going, the final section changes everything again. Your soulmate may reveal that the question they have been carrying is not simply whether you still remember them. It is whether there is still room for a new conversation between two people who have learned things they did not know before. They may not want to drag you backward into old patterns. They may not want to recreate every detail of what once existed. Instead, they may be wondering whether the two of you could meet again emotionally as different people, with greater honesty, clearer boundaries, and fewer assumptions. That is a much bigger question than, "Do you miss me?" Because missing someone is easy to admit privately. Asking whether something meaningful can be approached differently requires courage. And perhaps that is why your soulmate has written instead of simply appearing with a casual message. A casual message can hide behind small talk. A letter cannot hide as easily. A letter forces someone to choose their words. It makes them sit with the truth long enough to recognize what they actually want to say. And there, near the end of the page, your soulmate may finally write the sentence they have rewritten over and over again. "If I could tell you one thing without being afraid of your answer, I would tell you this," and the words that follow may be the very words you once wished you could hear. Not because they guarantee a perfect future, but because they reveal what was real beneath the uncertainty. Your soulmate may finally tell you that the connection was never meaningless to them. They may tell you that they remember more than you thought, regret more than they admitted, and understand more now than they did then. But there is still one final truth they have not written yet. It is the truth that determines whether this letter remains a confession about the past or becomes an invitation towards something new. And when that final truth appears, you will understand why your soulmate waited so long to put these words on paper.